There are a host of benefits that come with learning a new language, and today we're going to talk about ones that are often overlooked, the ones that can be harder to understand but can have the biggest impact on your life, the ones that can lead to personal transformation. When we think about personal growth, there are a few themes that come up again and again. One might be physical change, training your body through weightlifting or other exercise, or completely transforming something about your outer life, like remodeling your home, or moving to a new place, or getting a new degree or a new job. But I would argue that even for these outward-facing changes, the most important changes happen inside of us. And learning a language is a great example of a change that shows on the outside, but where the biggest transformation is internal. Here I'm going to talk about several of these changes, and how they'll impact you in ways you might not expect. Let's start with how speaking another language changes the way you experience the world. As I talked about in this video, different languages cut up the world differently. We tend to think that the world as we perceive it is the world as it actually is, but the way our language is structured very much affects the way we perceive things. Let me give you an example. Polite forms in some languages, like usted in Spanish, vous in French, or honorifics in Japanese, create different categories of people. Those who are at a further social distance from you, or above you in some hierarchy, and then those who are closer to you socially, or are at the same level or at a lower level than you in the hierarchy. In English, we don't have these grammatical categories. And one thing that is super clear to me in speaking English versus speaking Spanish is that however you treat another person, that requirement to treat them with a respectful form creates a situation that is something different from what would be created if you were speaking English. So given that the language you speak shifts your perception of the world, we should talk about the benefits you gain from changing your point of view in this way. First, you find yourself in an especially good position to take the perspective of people who are unlike you in many ways. In fact, if you remain open to it, I would argue that this perspective taking is unavoidable, and you have the opportunity to get outside your own bubble. I first learned the word gringo when I was visiting Mexico when my wife and I were dating. Gringo is a way to refer to Americans, that is, people from the US. It's very common, and replaces the much longer estadounidense. Estadounidense because, in Spanish, americano is for anyone from the Americas. I first understood it as a warm and relaxed way to refer to Americans, and I'd never felt put out by its use. But as I observed people using it, or not using it, or using it and then correcting themselves, I started to notice that gringo seems to carry with it a slight derogatory meaning, in some cases. And this speaks to a story about the origin of the word. That, when the US invaded Panama, the locals would say green, go, as in those in military uniforms, leave. And that it stuck as a way to refer to the Americans showing up on their shores. The upshot is this: by speaking and listening to Spanish, I'm able to see how Americans are referred to and thought of, not just outside the US, but in words that don't translate well into English. What I get from this is insight into how the US and its people are thought of by people in very different situations from me. I expand my view of the world by being able to interact with, and even take on, the perspective of others. And this leads me to another point. When you speak another language at a certain level of fluency, you're at a strange crossroads. You understand much of what is being said, and yet you feel a difference between you and this language, a distance that doesn't exist between you and your native tongue. And this distance between you and the language means a distance between you and the situation. An example is profanity. Many of us feel profanity in our first language in a way that goes beyond just knowing what the words mean. But in another language, this will typically be a lot less intense. And when we live in this different setting, this mode where we're at a greater distance from situations that we're a part of, still in them, but not in the same way. What this opens up is a space for considering the situation and ourselves from a different vantage point. There's just this little moment where you have a chance to think about how you normally react in such situations, and what this points to in yourself, and whether or not you like it. Learning a language isn't the only way to take the step back and consider yourself from a different point of view, but it's very strong in language learning, and it's a huge benefit for your personal growth. And what the shift in perspective ultimately leads to is the development of your second language personality, the you that comes up when you're speaking this other language. And this is a person who might prioritize things differently, value things slightly differently, or react in different ways in the same situations. You may find that you're more outgoing in general, or more confident when confronting another person, or more laid back than you tend to be in your first language. And having now these two ways to express yourself leads to another underappreciated benefit: an improved ability to communicate. When you have two language systems in your head, there's the constant demand to choose between more than one way of putting thoughts into words. This is in large part what researchers have identified as the reason language learning can improve cognitive functioning. It also means that, at times unconsciously, but sometimes quite consciously, when you talk to others, or when you write, or even when you passively read or listen, you're thinking about how it's best to communicate what you want to say, given the constraints of the system you're using. Let's see how this comes through in a simple example. In English, it's common to hear people say "I love you" with at least two distinct meanings. One is romantic, something you would say only to a partner, or a family member, or a close friend, and usually in situations that call for some gravity. Another is more lighthearted, something you would say to a wider range of friends, and in a wider range of situations. But in French, there are two different ways to say this, depending on how you mean it. Je t'aime is the first, deep and romantic, and je t'aime bien is the second, more lighthearted, more friendly. In English, there's one set of words for two uses, and in French, there's a different set of words for each. If you speak Spanish, you know that two options exist as well, using two completely different verbs. So when learning a language like French or Spanish, you pick up a new point of view and a new skill, thinking a little more closely about exactly what you mean when you say, I love you. And this sort of thinking spreads out into other parts of communication, prompting you to think about what it is you're trying to say and what the best way is to say it. So the next time you're having difficulty expressing yourself so that someone understands, you'll be more likely to back up and think about other ways you can get your point across. Now, anything that you learn about yourself in your second language, parts of your second language personality, aspects of your new points of view, your improved communication, transfers back to you in your first language. This back transfer means that the growth you experience in your second language becomes growth that you experience in general. And you'll find yourself more flexible with how you communicate, how you take others' points of view, and how you think about the world. So let me ask, is it important to challenge the way you see the world? I would argue that yes, it is. You end up understanding yourself and others better, and are more prepared for whatever might come in the future. The argument here is basically that growing as a human being is valuable. And growth often comes through accomplishing new things. And accomplishing new things is such an incredibly good way to explore the world, explore ourselves, and find meaning in life. This book I read recently, Psycho-Cybernetics, explains why accomplishing things can have such a powerful impact on us. And the idea is that humans are goal-oriented organisms. I recognize that this isn't always what we see, or how we feel, and that there are some cultural assumptions to consider as part of this. But the notion is that accomplishing things is really important to how we operate generally. I recommend you read the book. It's one of the earliest in the self-help and self-improvement movement of the 20th century. And more than anything is about questioning and changing the negative assumptions we make about ourselves. It's really worth a read. And this is where language comes in. Language is a big task. It's a goal, which needs to be broken down into smaller objectives and steps that you take on the way to accomplishing the goal. See my video about that here. In learning a language, there's a chance for improvement every single day. In fact, the only way to accomplish the larger goal of learning the language is to take the smaller steps. And so it's like other things that are as much about the destination as about the journey. Things like exercise, learning an instrument, or learning to cook or make YouTube videos, where there's the chance for small wins every day. And sometimes when we don't feel able or worthy, or when we don't feel that we can put energy forth, or we don't really want to try something new, all it takes is a small accomplishment to get us out of our rut. And I believe that incremental improvement in language learning is exactly that kind of thing that can be the spark to get us moving again. And when you work on yourself, you increase your confidence in how you present yourself, how you communicate, and if nothing else, in the knowledge that you can do hard things. And that is something that's transformative. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like or a comment, and check out the things I mentioned in the video in the description below, and we'll see you in the next one.